What if I told you that oil prices were going to rise by almost 100% in just a few days? Would you believe it? What if I told you the stock market could crash worse than the market crash during the pandemic shutdowns? Would you believe it? Or what if I told you we could be in for another recession? Would you believe it? Well, you might think that's impossible. One might think that the pandemic has already caused the worst stock market slump in years. How about bringing the war crisis in Ukraine into the picture now? The war in Ukraine has brought new uncertainty to a stock market that has already had a rocky start to the year. The S&P 500 stock index experienced its sharpest daily decline since May 2020 amid a war with no end in sight and mounting sanctions from the US and its European allies. With hundreds of civilians dead, including children, and more than 500,000 refugees fleeing Ukraine, the main consequences are clearly the human cost and not anything to do with people's investments. As the war rages on, the unpredictability of the consequences beyond Ukraine's borders is growing. Now let's get straight to the video. Be sure to watch this video to the end if you want to know how the war crisis in Ukraine is affecting stock markets around the world and the worst-case scenario might be. When Russia decided to invade Ukraine on February 24, 2022, Russia's aggression shocked not only Europe but the whole world. Nobody expected that there would be a war in Europe in the 21st century. While the news has certainly rocked the world, another thing to consider is that such a crisis can also have a negative impact on the stock market. War can bring down the stock market. Especially this time, it is not just an ordinary war. If Russia is involved, it could lead to potentially catastrophic economic downturns considering that Russia is a major exporter of oil and natural gas. Oil prices have already risen in recent years, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. However, this was to be expected and manageable. Oil demand fell as more people stayed at home during the lockdown and many jobs focused on setting up remote working arrangements. Many even believed that the rise in oil prices had already peaked. But wow, how wrong we are. Oil prices kept rising. Within a few days it rose to over $100. It was never just about oil and gas prices. But oil and gas prices are rising, which also means commodity prices will rise as well. Some may view rising oil prices as trivial. It only affects that and nothing else. But now comes inflation. Let's take the apple stand as an example. In order for the apples to reach local supermarkets, they are transported from farms that may be hundreds or thousands of miles away. Transportation is already expensive, but if oil and gas prices go up, that means the apples will get more expensive to ship too. And to offset the rising costs, suppliers will increase their prices, making apples more expensive in the market. The same logic applies to almost everything else we consume. Before this Ukraine and Russia crisis, the world already had a huge supply chain problem. Inflation was already high at 7.5%. Add to that an oil shock. Imagine how it will affect commodity prices everywhere. It's going to be disastrous. Inflation rates will skyrocket. When Russia began sending its troops near Ukraine's borders in 2021, US officials warned that Putin might be preparing for an all-out attack. Many people ignored this warning, thinking that Russia might back down because of possible repercussions from EU countries and the international community at large. But lo and behold, look what's going on. In fact, Russia is launching attacks and trying to invade Ukraine. The question is, why is Russia attacking now? Why is he trying to invade Ukraine? If you look at history, the answer is obvious. Since coming to power in 1999, Putin has expressed his view that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. He said several times that he wanted to restore and unite the former members of the USSR. These countries include Belarus, Ukraine, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and other Central Asian countries. Unfortunately for Putin, Russia has not been able to attract them, as these countries want to build a capitalist economy and work more closely with Western countries. When capitalism in Russia was not working as it should, the Baltic countries naturally turned to the West. Some joined NATO and allied with other European countries. One country, however, remained close to Russia. Guess which country? Yes, Belarus. This could be because Belarus has a very similar culture to Russia. Russian is even one of the two official languages. Although it wanted to be independent and develop close ties with Western countries, its history and ties with Russia remain strong. However, Ukrainians are different. They always wanted Ukraine to be a democratic and independent country. Unfortunately, Russia hatched plans to intervene. He funded Viktor Fedorovich Yanukovych's presidential candidacy in the 2010 Ukrainian elections. With Russian support, Yanukovych became Ukraine's fourth president. So when Yanukovych was faced with the choice between Russia and other European countries with which to sign a trade deal, it was no surprise that he chose Russia. Ukrainians were disappointed and took to the streets to protest. They opposed Russian intervention and control. And since then, the animosity between these two countries has continued to grow. Russia also began funding separatist groups in Donbass, which led to political instability in Ukraine. In 2014, it also annexed Crimea. Although most countries in the world still considered Crimea to be part of Ukraine, that didn't stop Putin from invading the small peninsula and claiming it as one of Russia's federal subjects. And in recent years, Russia had also hoped to do the same with the rest of Ukraine. With its strong military power, Ukraine is certainly at a disadvantage. The spread of COVID-19 has also been a boon for Russia to build stronger ties with some of its neighboring states. In Belarus, the pandemic sparked protests against the government's slow response to COVID-19. When it got out of hand, guess what the Belarusian dictator did? Yes, he turned to Russia for help. Russian troops were sent to help Belarus and have never left since. You could say, but what does that have to do with Ukraine? Well, the answer is place. Just look at the map and it all makes sense. Belarus is strategically located near Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine. Here Russia can begin its invasion of Ukraine. The next question we need to think about now is, when will this war end? When will this crisis end? Russia, given its strong and large military capabilities, expected a quick victory against Ukraine. It also doesn't help that Ukraine doesn't have enough military resources and seems to be expecting help from NATO instead. How did the US react? Well, President Biden has made it clear that no American soldier will set foot on Ukrainian soil to fight. Ukraine is basically on its own. If the war drags on, it will certainly put Ukraine in a very difficult situation. The country is heavily dependent on Russian gas. And we all know that Russia is one of the largest oil producers in the world. Therefore, if the war does not stop soon, we should expect oil prices to continue to rise. And we know that with high oil prices around the world comes high inflation. Wars are unpredictable. Political uncertainty means more market volatility. The tendency is for investors to hold on to their money during times of conflict and instability by reducing demand in the market. The effect? It will drag stock prices down. No wonder then that the market has been declining since the beginning of the war. If oil prices continue to rise, the market as a whole will fall into recession. At this point, there is a general slowdown in economic activity, which usually occurs when spending is generally falling. This is likely to continue and could get even worse if the war doesn't end soon. Now you're wondering what will happen next. Isn't higher inflation the worst thing? The answer is that it isn't. The worst case scenario is stagflation. Stagflation is a combination of recession and inflation. It is a situation where the inflation rate is high but economic growth is slow. The prices will continue to rise due to the crisis, but the purchasing power of the market is falling. If this happens, the question we should ask ourselves is, how low will the stock market plummet? Thank you very much for watching. If you like what you've watched, stay tuned for more videos. Feel free to comment down below your request and questions, we'll be happy to read them.